Hi, my name is Frankie Painter, and today I will be reviewing Summer for the Gods, the Scopes Trial, and America's Continuing Debate Over Science and Religion by Edward Larson, published by Basic Book, a member of the Paresis Book Group, copyrighted 1997. Larson's book dives into the fundamentalist movement against evolution and how its development evolved around the Scopes Trial of 1925. Larson organizes his books into three specific parts, labeled simply as before, during, and afterward. By arranging his book in this manner, Larson is able to fully develop the timeline of the anti-evolution movement and how the Scopes trial directly affected it. In the before section, Larson fleshes out the background information of not only the anti-evolution movement, but of the men who would play major parts in the trial and who would ultimately be seen and remembered as the faces of the trial. William Jennings Bryan and Clarence Darrow are both widely remembered for their roles in the trial, specifically Darrow's questioning of Bryan about his faith during the trial while on stand. Larson introduces these men in the beginning of the book to set the stage for why these two figures would get involved in the issue. Darrow was very anti-Christianity, having been discussed by biographer Kevin Tierney as viewing the religion as a slave religion. Darrow jumped at the chance to challenge the fundamentalist belief in creationists, with the Scopes trial, rather than actually addressing the issue at hand of whether or not John Scopes broke Tennessee law by teaching evolution as a substitute biology teacher, as he was reading it straight out of a textbook. Bryan was very pro anti-evolution works and laws and whatnot. Larson even opens his work with the scene between Darrow and Bryan. This scene has been made the focal point of the trial by many historians, starting with Frederick Lewis Allen's account of his book Only Yesterday, An Informal History of the 1920s, in which he dedicates one chapter to the Scopes trial. Allen presents this moment in the trial very dramatically, with Darrow very aggressively questioning Bryan and shooting off questions very quickly, rather than the actual pace of the trial. And ultimately, they see this as a triumph for Darrow because he is able to get Bryan to admit that his belief in the 7 days of creation is different in the Bible, as in that it's not literal, as in the 7 days were not 24-hour days as we count them, as time passes. This was seen as a win for the evolutionist, as one of the fundamentalist biggest supporters, Bryan, admitted that he did not take a 100% strict and literal interpretation of the Bible. This interpretation is more of a modernist view and a sort of the more modern viewpoints that the religions were going to at this time. So much of Larson's book addresses the fact that the Scopes trial quickly becomes very sensational and began to represent bigger issues rather than just addressing the simple fact of whether or not John Scopes had broken Tennessee law, once again, by reading the chapters on evolution in the classroom. On one hand, the trial is going to be seen as a battle between those who believed in evolution versus those who believed in divine creation. On another hand, the trial is going to be seen as a fight for individual liberties and whether or not state-funded schools should be restricted by law on what they can teach and what they cannot teach. The constitutionality of the law is going to be brought under question, even though that is not really the specific reason that John Scopes was on trial. John Scopes was not arrested dramatically or anything like that. It was very much a setup to test this Tennessee law. So Larson really digs into this issue in the during section of his work and gives extremely detailed information on all of the men who are going to represent the prosecution and the defense and their strategies during the trial. So obviously Darrow, Malone, and Hayes are on the defense, and Darrow especially is going to take the approach of actually attacking Christianity at its core and challenging the very concept of creationism, and whether or not the Bible is intended to be taken literally and things like that. However, Stewart, who's going to be the lead of the prosecution, is going to actually attempt to keep the trial about the actual issue at hand, once again, Scopes' breaking of the law. However, the trial kind of spirals out through that, especially once Darrow is questioning William Jennings Bryan on the stand. So Larson's afterward section is going to discuss how the fundamentalist movement continued after the end of the trial. The outcome of the trial was kind of seen as a win by both sides. William Jennings Bryan is actually going to pass away shortly after the trial, and a lot of people are going to say that Darrow was responsible for that in his questioning, and because he was able to kind of present that Bryan wasn't all about everything that he had said he was. So Scopes was found guilty of breaking the Tennessee law, but Bryan's responses during Darrow's questioning were seen as a loss for the anti-evolution movement and the fundamentalists who support him. Larson asserts that, and I quote, "The pace of anti-evolution activism actually picked up after the trial, especially in the South, but it encountered increased popular resistance everywhere." So we're going to see states such as Arkansas, Texas, and Mississippi were actually successful in passing laws banning the teaching of evolution in schools shortly after this time period. However, while the movement was really successful in the South, the North was significantly less likely to pass such legislation. It wouldn't be until 1968 before anti-evolution laws are going to be struck down by the Supreme Court. And that sort of started as a movement in 1948 by the Supreme Court when they started banning required reading of the Bible in schools, prayer in schools, that kind of thing. So, however, Larson also is going to include the information that it has been as recently as 2004 that schools in Cobb County, Georgia, were required to put disclaimers on textbooks that would assert that evolution was a theory rather than a fact. Historiographically, Larson's work differs and builds upon from previous historians. We kind of have two groups. We have the early historians who wrote about it, and then a large group in the 1950s. So while other historians, included Richard Hofstadter, have asserted that the fundamentalist movement died as a result of the Scopes trial, Larson is more prone to agree with historians such as Joel A. Carpenter that argue while the fundamentalists withdrew, they certainly did not go away completely. Their movement did not die. Instead, they created a subculture where their beliefs would not be challenged. This can be seen in the building of fundamentalist colleges, schools, radio ministries, things like that. And unlike previous works, Larson tries to create a more complete picture of the trial rather than focusing on that sensational aspects that are traditionally remembered. That sensationalism really comes based off of early historians basing their own research and their own depictions of the trial on Frederick Lewis and Allen's work. And only yesterday, it's not really seen as something that was serious. It's more of treated as something that's sensational. It's called the monkey trial. Not a whole lot of actual like, oh, this was important kind of aspect to it. This is going to change in the 1950s. And a lot of the published work on the Scopes trial are going to be published by historians of the 1950s. This is possibly due to the presence of McCarthyism and the Second Red Scare. Ray Gender is going to take this approach in his 1958 book about the Scopes trial, saying that the Senate hearings regarding Joseph R. McCarthy, where the line of questioning was weak and compromised, but the mere fact that McCarthy could be forced to answer questions at all caused millions of people to see him in a new way. And they're comparing this to Darrow's questioning of Bryan in the Scopes trial. So the benefit to this in the 1950s is that the historians are taking a much more serious view of the trial, as it is something that is going to continue to be an issue in America even through today. Larson's work definitely fits better into these newer works than he does the earlier historians of the 1920s, 1930s, as he really asserts the lasting effects of the Scopes trial on society. It's not like the Scopes trial happened, anti-evolution law stayed in place, and then nothing ever changed. In Larson's view, the Scopes trial was a representation of an issue that is still a part of even today's modern world. Even now, anytime the issue of evolution in schools comes up, the media is going to pay attention. And most people feel very strongly about this issue, regardless of which side that they are on. So the separation of church and state is kind of blurred in the school system, as many groups, such as the ACLU, who are part of the Scopes trial initially, protest limiting what teachers can teach scientifically. They don't want to say that teachers should teach creationism just because they are Christians, nor should they just teach evolutionism because it's scientifically a part of like how the world was created. However, it is generally accepted that teachers should not bring their own religious beliefs into the school, and much of the religious behavior is still prohibited in the school system. I myself have worked at schools where I was not allowed to wear, kind of the rules for all teachers was any sort of jewelry or insignia or anything that would relate to what our personal beliefs were. These issues of whether evolution should be taught in schools, whether creationism should be taught in schools, should they be taught side by side, is still very much prominent in today's society, and you can see it in the media pretty regularly. So I think Larson did a wonderful job of kind of putting all this together. His work does a really great job of digging into the details and making sure that you kind of get the full picture and not just the kind of more sensational aspects that happened. He really digs into those details of what happened every day of the trial, when the jury was actually in the room, when the jury was not in the room, things like that. I do think that he wrapped up his book very well with his final sentence, and I'm going to go ahead and end with it too. And he said, "That wind has sporadically touched off maelstroms over the past 80 years, storms that sorely test America's national tradition of tolerance. If history offers a barometer for future events, it forecasts more heavy weather ahead." Thank you for watching.